In this second video on the Data Manager, we'll have a look at how you can filter data, what data locations are, and also some additional menu options for the data in Dataman. In the previous video, we imported 6 T-series and we performed motion correction using the configure stabilization and the stabilized batch operation. So after that has run, we are now left with 12 T-series, of which 2 and 2 are duplicates. But or not really duplicates, but you have the motion corrected T-series here. So you can see here that there's a column called stabilized, and this column has a checkbox for the ones that have undergone the stabilization operation in Normcore. So probably there are 2 things to talk about here. Probably you don't want to move on with the data that has not been stabilized. You have a couple options to get rid of it. You can, first of all, select the ones that you want to get rid of. You can choose File, Remove Selected. Another option is to start a new session with the data you want to keep. So in this case, I'm going to select the data that has been stabilized just manually and go File, and then New Session from Selection. And this will open a new Data Manager exactly the same way, but it only contains the data you had selected. Another option, however, that you can combine with the 2 previous is to filter this list. So up here you have a little text input box, and in this box you can basically put any MATLAB expression and use it to filter this list. This is a complex thing to enter. If it just says true here, if the expression here evaluates to true for each piece of data, then that data will be included in the list. You have a preset series over here in which you can choose presets that are easier to use in case you don't want to write these yourself. So here it says true, no filter, that just lists everything. You have one here that says DLoc, load var stabilized false equals true, and we're going to get back in a moment to what this actually means. This is what we call the data location working. And you have multiple other selections here that are predefined, including one just to pick randomly 50% of the list, basically. So let's go here and choose, we only want to see the ones that are stabilized, only stabilized, and choose apply. And there you go. Now your list contains only the ones that have this option. You can also then go back and do the opposite and choose only non-stabilized and apply filter, and you get the inverse list. So once you performed one of these filtering steps, you can of course do exactly the same thing you did before. You can select everything and go File, New Session from Data, and then you can, for instance, save this session. So we can save this session. I'm going to do Save Session. I'm going to save it to my desktop. I'm going to say stabilized or motion corrected. And then I have a session that I can reopen in the future that only contains the motion corrected data. Keep in mind that if you create your own expressions here, then those expressions will not be saved, so you might want to write those down elsewhere. So the next thing to talk about here is, what is this DLoc, the load var stabilized false? What is this expression? And this becomes a little bit more technical. Essentially, Begonia has a metadata system called DataLocations. And as you can see in this list, there are a number of fields or properties that are associated with these objects, even though they are just paths on the disk. So if you have a look here, you can see the paths of the actual data that we are loading. So Begonia takes a very straightforward and simple approach to adding this type of metadata, and effectively any type of metadata, to a path. So if you load anything, whether it's a file or a folder like this that has a path, you can associate additional data with it, and this is what we call the data location mechanism. So in a list like this, you can define whatever columns you want. We can go into the View menu and choose Variable Picker. I'm just going to close this window, get that out of the way. So in the variable picker, you're presented with a pretty long list, and these are actual variables that are contained on these data already. But you're going to create a new one here, and as you can see, this list over here reflects this list of columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go path, and I'm going to go demo, just because we're doing a demonstration. I'm going to click apply, and when the data reloads, you can see that there is now another column here called demo. I can't do anything with it, and in fact I've already added a number with the demo variable here. But notice what happens if I push an exclamation mark in front of this variable name, click apply, and then this field becomes editable. So I can now write whatever I want into it. The standard punching the keyboard to input something. So when I do this, this data gets saved into the metadata for this particular file. One important thing to note about this is that using the data location mechanism, effectively you need no setup. The mechanism itself will create a metadata folder either inside the folder that you are pointing at, if it's this, if it is a folder, or if it's a file, then it will create a metadata folder adjacent to that file that will contain all these additional metadata. The way this is practically worked is, for instance, if you do a marking of regions of interest, then it will save that table of regions of interest into the metadata structure. And basically configurations and derived data, all of that goes into this metadata directory. So we find this mechanism to be very, very useful and practical. What you're looking at up here, where it says dloc load var stabilized false equals true, basically means that for each of these items, it will look on the data location that is this item. It will load a variable called stabilized with a default value of false. But if that value is true, it will include it in the list. So this is the data location mechanism. And if you're more interested in the technical details and how this works and how you can programmatically use this in your analysis, and I do recommend that you have a look at this, then have a look in the documentation on the GitHub and you'll see how it works. We find this mechanism to be incredibly convenient. And a very common scenario is that you want to have a list here that, let's say that you have to perform a manual step, such as marking rows on each of these data. Then it's good to have a column like this where you can see that that step has been performed or not. So you can see how far along in your manual steps you are. Okay, so this concludes this video. In the next video, we'll look at some additional menu options in Dataman and how to use those.